The second I heard my name over the intercom, "Lena, can you come to my office?" I knew. It wasn't intuition. It was something colder. A numbness born of 1,000 tiny slights, ignored contributions, and forced smiles. I stood up slowly, the buzzing of fluorescent lights above barely louder than the silence from my team. No one looked at me. They already knew too. When I stepped into Mr. Keller's office, Derek was already seated, legs sprawled wide, his fingers laced behind his head like he'd just won the lottery. The smugness practically seeped from his pores. Keller gestured for me to sit, but I didn't. I couldn't. "Lena," he said, clearing his throat like he was about to deliver wisdom, "you've been a real asset. But we've decided to move forward with Derek as the new division lead. He just has the presence, you know." Presence. That one word splintered everything I'd built inside me for years. Not performance, not impact, not results. Presence. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I simply opened my bag, pulled out a sealed envelope with my resignation letter, and placed it gently on the desk between them. "What's this?" Keller blinked, glancing at the letter like it was a coupon he hadn't asked for. "My resignation," I said, locking eyes with him. "Effective immediately." Derek snorted. Keller raised a brow but said nothing. I turned and walked out, past my silent team, past 6 years of swallowed pride and unacknowledged victories. The only sound was the soft thump of the envelope hitting the mahogany desk, and the ticking time bomb inside it. He wouldn't open it right away. But when he did, he'd realize what a monumental mistake he'd just made. They say if you work hard, keep your head down, and stay loyal, you'll be rewarded. I believed that for 6 years. I was always the first one in, coffee in one hand, bug list in the other. I stayed late. I mentored new hires. I patched Derek's code more times than I can count. Half the systems under his name. Mine. But he was the kind of guy who made a room notice him. Loud, confident, cocky. He could mess something up and still laugh about it, like it was someone else's fault, and people let him. Especially Keller. I remember one time I worked all weekend rewriting a failed integration Derek had promised would be ready for the client on Monday. Keller walked in during the demo, saw it all running smoothly, and clapped Derek on the back. "You're a magician," he grinned. Derek didn't correct him. He just winked at me like I should be flattered. I wasn't. I was tired. So when the division lead position opened up, I did what I always did, I prepared. I outlined a vision for streamlining the department, optimizing workloads, even proposed a mentoring pipeline to reduce burnout. I had KPIs, case studies, a decade's worth of receipts. But in the end, Keller didn't even ask to see my pitch. He made his decision over lunch with Derek, and then told me in that office, like it was nothing. Like I was nothing. What hurt most wasn't being passed over. It was realizing that I'd been invisible the entire time. That I had played the long game, in a place that rewarded shortcuts and showboating. So I swallowed the burn in my throat, handed him my resignation letter, and watched as Derek leaned back with that stupid victorious smirk. "Big move," Derek said as I turned to leave. "Hope you've got something lined up." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He had no idea what I had just set in motion. What no one ever bothered to ask was, why everything in our department worked so smoothly, despite Derek. They didn't know that the entire automation pipeline they praised at last quarter's review, I designed it from scratch quietly after hours because Derek didn't have time for the boring backend stuff. They didn't know I migrated our whole development system to a cloud structure under my personal subscription just to bypass the bureaucratic red tape that would delayed the launch by 3 months. I kept receipts. Everything I touched had metadata, timestamps, backups. I documented. Not for praise, but for safety. I'd learned the hard way that people like Derek float because people like me build the water beneath them. But I had reached my limit. And I had one final card to play. For the past 6 months, I'd been building something on the side. A software prototype that had been rejected internally for being too niche, but I knew its value. I owned the IP. I kept it quiet, polished it slowly, and quietly showed it to an investor contact I met at a Women in Tech event. He said, "If you ever leave, call me first." So I did. But the real twist wasn't just my next move. It was what I left behind. That resignation letter wasn't just a thank you for the opportunity. It included a complete timeline of contributions, code commits, email chains, Slack messages, architecture drafts, all with my name on them. It was calm, factual, cold, and in the final paragraph, I wrote, "Please ensure that any future representations of the systems under discussion give credit where it is due. As the sole architect and designer of 72% of the infrastructure currently presented under Mr. Andrews' oversight, I reserve the right to pursue legal ownership of my contributions if my attribution continues." I didn't want to fight. But I wasn't going to be erased, either. I wasn't just resigning. I was reclaiming what they tried to take. The first sign of trouble came 2 days after I left. The company's flagship product, the one Derek was supposed to unveil to the board, crashed during staging. Not a little hiccup. A total lockout. No one could access the development servers. Not IT. Not Keller. Not even Derek, who stood in front of a team of engineers, looking like a man who had wandered into a battlefield holding a lat. What they didn't realize was this: the infrastructure they depended on ran through my personal DevOps account, the DNS, the CD pipelines, the test environments, all of it was built under my license, because the company's procurement process had been too slow and Derek never followed through on approvals. I had flagged it in writing repeatedly. They ignored it. Keller told me, "Just make it work." So I did. On my terms. At the cafe across the street, I sipped my tea and watched through the windows as Derek paced in circles, frantically tapping his phone. He called. Twice. I didn't answer. Then Keller called. I let it go to voicemail. His voice cracked by the end of the message. "Lena, we need access. You are the only one who can fix this. Please call me back." The best part. I had never sabotaged a thing. I didn't shut anything down. I didn't change a single line of code. I just left. And the moment I did, the entire house of cards started to shake. It wasn't just the tech infrastructure. Either my departure triggered a chain reaction. Client emails started flooding in with questions only I ever answered. Deadlines slipped. Junior team members quit. One even admitted in an exit interview that Derek had screamed at her in front of others, and she stayed only because I had protected her. Keller's illusion of control dissolved hour by hour. He realized too late that he had promoted a facade and let the foundation walk out the door with a single envelope, and inside that envelope, not just my resignation, but the map to everything he was now begging to salvage. I didn't want revenge. Not really. I wanted recognition, ownership, peace. But I also knew people like Keller didn't learn from loss, they only reacted to power shifts. So I planned my exit not as a tantrum, but as a blueprint for collapse. 3 days after I left, I received a panicked email from HR. "Can we set up a time to discuss your transition?" It was copy-pasted fluff, sent at midnight. I didn't reply. 12 hours later, Keller emailed me directly. The subject line, "Critical, we need your assistance." Now that got my attention. I responded with polite distance, "Hi Mr. Keller, I'd be happy to discuss terms for a limited consulting engagement. My rate is $350, HR. However, please note that all my infrastructure contributions and workflows remain my intellectual property unless otherwise contracted. I'm attaching a scope of services and a draft agreement. Please review before any technical handover." That email might as well have been a match to a dry forest. Within an hour, he called again. I picked up this time. His voice had none of the old authority. No casual superiority. Just fatigue and embarrassment. Lena, we're in trouble. I need to admit something. Promoting Derek was a mistake. I see it now. I let the silence stretch before answering. I know. I'll do whatever it takes to bring you back. I'm not coming back, I said flatly. But I'm willing to help you clean up, under my terms. And only if all public credit for the systems I built is corrected. I've attached the press language. And I'll need full release of any claims over my prototype. Your prototype. I told you about it twice. You dismissed it as too technical for marketing. That's okay. I have other investors now. He didn't argue. He just sighed. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. We signed the agreement that afternoon. Within 2 days, I'd stabilized their systems remotely and packaged up a clean exit strategy. In return, my name appeared on the company's internal bulletin as Lead Systems Architect 2017-2023. A correction. A rewrite of history. And the beginning of a new one. And as for Derek, reassigned to Client Relationship Management, which, I imagine, felt a lot like exile. The invitation arrived on a Wednesday. We'd be honored if you'd attend the executive roundtable next Friday. Your insights on technical leadership would be invaluable. It came from Keller's assistant. Polished. Formal. Almost deferential. They were hosting a company-wide summit to rebuild culture and restore trust. A thinly veiled apology tour. My name was listed as a guest speaker on the panel. For a moment, I considered declining. But then I remembered something. Sometimes justice isn't served in silence. Sometimes, it needs a witness. So I walked into that room, not as Lena the employee, but as Lena Hartley, founder and CEO of Cynosure Systems, the startup I had quietly launched with the very prototype they had ignored. I wore the same blazer I'd worn on my first day at the company. Full circle. Derek was already on stage when I entered. He spotted me instantly. His mouth twitched into a nervous half-smile that quickly disappeared when I didn't return it. Keller stood stiffly near the back, arms crossed, eyes darting toward the door as though expecting someone to save him. I didn't speak first. I waited. When my turn came, the moderator said, "Lena, you've made a rather impactful transition this year. Could you speak to what you think makes a leader effective in a tech environment?" I smiled gently. A true leader listens. Gives credit freely. Builds a team that thrives without needing to shout about it. And most importantly, knows when the quietest person in the room is holding up the ceiling. The room went still. And, I added, if you ever find yourself leading a company that collapses when one person leaves, you weren't leading. You were leaning. There were a few audible gasps. Derek shifted uncomfortably. Keller lowered his gaze. After the panel, Keller approached me, his hand extended. "Lena," he said, his voice thin. "You were right. I'm sorry." I looked at his hand, then met his eyes. "I know," I said. I didn't shake it. 6 months later, Forbes Tech Quarterly featured me in their Founders to Watch issue. My photo was on page 3. Taken at the launch event of Cynosure Systems, where we unveiled a revolutionary infrastructure management platform tailored for growing development teams. The tagline, "Built by the woman they overlooked." We had 5 enterprise clients signed by the end of our first quarter, including Keller's biggest competitor. I didn't plan to make it personal. But they reached out to us after hearing about my resignation letter. Apparently, the industry talks more than Keller realized. Word had spread fast. What truly sealed everything, though, was the press release Cynosure sent out that fall. "We're thrilled to announce our newest enterprise partnership with Clarion Tech, including a full-scale migration from their legacy infrastructure, previously overseen by Derek Andrews, to a secure, scalable solution architected by our founder, Lena Hartley." It went viral on LinkedIn. A week later, Keller quietly stepped down to pursue other ventures. Derek, I heard, tried to apply to one of our client companies. He didn't get past the first interview, and me. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need revenge. Because I had something far more permanent, a company that ran with my name on every line of code. A team that actually saw me. And a reputation that spoke louder than any resignation letter ever could. But still, I kept a copy of that letter, framed on the wall of my new office, not as a reminder of what they did to me, but of what I chose to do in return.